Yeah. I
And
gotcha.
so, yeah, so it was by the time I understood what we needed, they were so far down the road that it was like
Yeah.
we couldn't get grant dollars, which is really unfortunate. I
We're
was
live on
just,
YouTube, just so you know.
oh, okay.
Oh, it's okay. You can talk. I just wanted you to know.
Do you want us to turn off our cameras now?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Um,
So anyway, there's, as you know, Brian, there are fits and starts of dollars available, and you just have to
For
be
sure.
ready. You have to be ready and apply
Shovel ready.
appropriately. Yes,
Yeah.
and it was, but it was like needed to be done right then or was already underway. So it was,
Yeah.
I
That's what
appreciate
we're
it. Yeah.
that's where we're getting ready for that Ohio River restoration funding. If that ever drops, I'm trying to get all the communities with a bunch of shovel ready projects.
Yeah.
Because we know what will happen if we're not, is that money will get sucked up by Cincinnati and Louisville and
Billy
these areas.
TJ uh is in the file. You're muted.
Hey Brian, welcome.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey, Billy.
hey. Oh, guys, it's 10:59. We probably ought to get started.
Yep.
Sorry. I'm sorry I'm a little late coming back from seminar.
Okay. Let's start the webinar. If you want to turn your camera off, Brian, for now. Hi, everyone. We'll get started here in just a second. Thank you for joining us.
Beautiful day. Can't believe we're going to get in the 60s, upper
I
60s.
know, and then snow on Monday.
We are in Kentucky.
We are. If you don't like it, just wait. All right, we need to get started. We got the recording going. Okay. Are you ready to go?
I suppose.
All right. Hi, I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, we have got a really neat show today. We're talking about Wings of Kentucky and watersheds.
I know, really exciting. We always love our Wings of Kentucky episodes because Dr. DJ McNeil does such a good job with those. We'll be talking about fall migration with some migratory birds this time, so looking forward to that. We also have Dr. Amanda Gumbert with us. So, she's frequently on here, but she's got a special guest with her today, Brian Storrs, looking at the Licking River, I believe, watershed area. So looking forward to that conversation there. But really appreciate you all being with us today. If you've got any questions for our presenters, please use the chat function in Zoom. And if you're on YouTube or a podcast listener, thank you. But you can interact with us via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu. But yeah, glad to be with you today, Renee, on this beautiful day here in Lexington, Kentucky. I know. Let's enjoy it and with some good content for today.
There you go. So let's go ahead and get started with our Wings of Kentucky segment.
All right.
Okay, folks, welcome to another Wings of Kentucky. Let me hide my meeting controls on Zoom here and we will get started. Okay, I'm very excited to talk to you all today about fall migration. We are currently in the height of fall migration here in central Kentucky. A lot of cool things going on with our bird communities, both the resident species and those transient species. And I'm thrilled to talk about some of those phenomenon today. So when you're thinking about migratory birds, there are a lot of interesting questions that arise and a lot of questions that people have asked me over the years about different species. Um, but fall migration is a particularly special time. Spring migration, don't get me wrong, I love spring migration. We've talked about spring migration quite a bit on Wings of Kentucky, and I think most birders and naturalists, there's a special place in our hearts for spring migration, but fall migration is pretty cool in its own right for a variety of reasons. For those who have just really liked the fall season, being able to add migratory birds to that is a treat. But for the birds themselves, this is pretty essential. This time of year, after all the birds have finished reproducing for the year, is generally when we have the most birds on the landscape, pretty much right now. And all the birds have just bred and just had their babies. So there's tons of birds out on the landscape. Um, and they're getting ready to head south for the winter in most species, or many species anyway. And what those birds are going to do is they're going to fatten up, they're going to rest, they're going to migrate in short bursts and head south for the winter, where they're going to basically wait out the winter until the spring breeding season returns again. So we're going to discuss a few key aspects of fall migration today. How do birds migrate? How do they navigate across huge landscapes? What species are moving through Kentucky right now? At least we're going to talk about a few of the biggies. And how do migration routes work? So in a lot of bird species, they are migrating through parts of their geographic range where they migrate. Now, in some species, the migratory route may be different from the breeding route, but in other species, those places are the same. So for instance, this is the wood thrush, which we're actually going to talk about a little bit more today. This is a species that, sorry, let me just hide my meeting controls one more time. This is the species that breeds throughout, get my little cursor back, breeds throughout the eastern United States. So this is a map from the eBird website, and all of this red area are locations where wood thrush breed and occur during the summer and spring. These yellow areas, these are areas where the wood thrush can only be found during migration. So pretty much like this time of year or in the corresponding spring migration. And we're not going to talk about winter all that much here, but the winter range is shown in blue on this map. So for many species, their migratory route is the in-between area, bridging their breeding and wintering grounds, places that they can only be found in migration. So in the case of the wood thrush, again, it's got a very large breeding distribution, a little area where it's only found in migration, and then a wintering range. In species like the chestnut-sided warbler here, we see a much larger migration route. So it's a little hard to see, but this is Kentucky here. And there's very little of Kentucky that hosts breeding chestnut-sided warblers. Most of the state, we only see this species during migration. So it's breeding throughout the southern boreal forest and Appalachia. And it migrates through everywhere in between and winters in Central and South America. So migration itself. So migration is punctuated by a series of migration stopovers. And migration stopover is an aptly named phenomenon. The birds are not just moving in one big wave, right? They're going to make little jumps with little short breaks. So this is the Swainson's thrush, which we're also going to talk about more later. And this bird is probably going to migrate some number of miles, usually at nighttime, and then stop, take a break for several days or a week, maybe even more, on its way south. Now, in most bird species, fall migration happens slower than spring migration. So spring migration in a lot of species may only take a week or two. Fall migration can take a few weeks or even a couple months, depending on the species. So as a bird like this Swainson's thrush is moving from north to south, it's going to have these little stopover locations where it pauses and rests for some amount of time, where it's feeding, where it's resting, where it's recovering its fat, it's rebuilding its muscle, getting ready for the next leg of migration. A really good, there's many examples of this, but a really good study on this is the Blackpoll warbler by DeLuca et al. 2019. And I know this is a somewhat complicated infographic from that paper, but what I want you to see is they've got these Blackpoll warblers. This is roughly what the bird looks like. And it's got these little backpacks that they strapped onto them. And they caught birds in Nome, Denali, Whitehorse, and Churchill. So these different sites are colored with different colored dots. And those birds headed south, and they winter in South America. These birds did not stop until they hit these triangle areas. These are stopover sites. So these birds migrated just hardcore until they hit the East Coast, paused for a few days, migrated again across the Gulf, and then migrated again here, stopped over again here for a little while until they finally made the final leg of their migration to their wintering grounds. So this is a very extreme example. A more typical example would include a lot more stopover sites along this route. There are also many species of birds that have facultative or partial migration, species that migrate in parts of their range and not others, or only part of the population moves, or you may have a situation where the population shifts around, but we don't see occurrence patterns change. So like a blue jay is a really good example where it is a year-round resident in places like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, but certain times a year, we seem to have way more blue jays than other times of the year because that species does undergo partial migration. So you may have areas like up here in Ontario where there are always some blue jays all year round, but maybe in a really bad winter, 90% of them leave. So that would be a good example of such a species. So how do birds migrate and how do they navigate across these really huge and complex places, right? I'm looking at a map, maybe this doesn't look so bad, but like this is a pretty large area to travel. Imagine being that little blackpoll warbler going from Alaska all the way to the Amazon River. That is a substantial distance to travel. One way that birds are able to do this is using orientation by the stars. And a researcher named Stephen Emlen once did a famous study using these planetariums and these funnels that have come to be known as Emlen funnels to study migration. Now, I mentioned earlier that migration is a nocturnal phenomenon, and that is one of the reasons why, and that's in most species. We're going to talk about some exceptions in a moment. But most of these little songbirds, they're migrating at night, which is why they're able to use the stars to navigate. And what Emlen did to kind of prove that this is happening is he put these birds, in this case, an indigo bunting, and I think that's a species he frequently used, into a funnel. And that funnel had wire across the top. So the bird can see out of the funnel, but it cannot get out because of the wire. And the funnel is situated into a little dish, and in the center of the dish is an ink pad. So what happens is the bird can see out of the funnel and can see the night sky, the stars, and is standing on an ink pad, and it attempts to fly south or north, whichever way. I think this is actually spring migration, so flying north. And what you see is its little ink-covered feet are leaving little footprints on the side of the funnel. So when you view it from above, you can see that the bird was primarily trying to go that way and head northeast in this case. Well, how do we know that the stars are what's doing it? Here we have the bird placed in a planetarium, and the orientation of the planetarium is normal, and most of the footprints are heading in a northeasterly direction. Well, what Emlen did is flip the planetarium backwards so that the bird is seeing an upside down night sky and tricked into thinking that south is north, and all of its footprints basically reversed. So that pretty cleanly showed us, okay, birds are using stars, at least in some capacity, to orient on their migration. Many species also use learning and landmarks. These are usually long-lived social species, so these are Canada geese. They're a very classic long-lived social bird. The male and female live many, many years. They stay together as a pair generally for most of their life and until one of them dies. And they have their young that stay with them for an extended period of time and can learn the migration route from their parents. Usually we see this in species that are like have strong cognitive abilities in some capacity. And it could be taught by parents. It's called vertical transmission, as with like these geese, maybe teaching their young. Or we can see a horizontal transmission, which is not from mom to kids, but actually from bird to bird that may or may not be related. So like crows and jays and things like that, and they actually often migrate during the day. Those birds may not migrate with their parents, but may learn to migrate and use landmarks from other unrelated individuals. There's also a strong genetic component. This is especially in smaller songbirds, especially species that don't use a ton of learning on their migration. So like this little Swainson's thrush again, he keeps popping up and he's going to pop up again in a few minutes. These birds often don't migrate with their parents or even necessarily others of their same species. They're going to be solitary and often just migrating in like a loose flock of mixed birds. Sometimes there are others of the same species, sometimes not. And this study here by Delmore and Irwin, 2014, showed a really cool example of how genetics drives migratory routes. And they examined these two different subspecies of the Swainson's thrush in the Pacific Northwest. And one subspecies of Swainson's thrush migrates along the Pacific coast. Another kind of migrates across the central US and flies across the Gulf. Well, what they found that was pretty crazy is if you examine offsprings of these Swainson's thrush that are of hybrid origin, so they're a mix of one parent being from this Pacific migratory subspecies and one from the central migratory subspecies, the offspring migrate right up the middle, demonstrating a very nice genetic component to migration. Now, we also have really interesting phenomena with these things called eruptive species, where their ranges vary by year. So good examples would be the redpoll and pine siskin. This is redpoll here, and this is its distribution. Its breeding only range is up here in the high Arctic. We've got this all year round range here across the boreal, and then this winter only range down here, where some years it gets down into the upper Midwest, and then some other years it may dip down even into Kentucky for parts of the range. And that eruptive range, this dotted line, is only going to be every so often. A lot of these northerly species do this. And this is usually driven by the availability of seed crop in the boreal forest, often also interplaying with the abundance of insects in the boreal forest. So if they have like a lot of insects up there, they may have lots of babies. But then if there's a poor seed crop, those babies are going to be traveling far and wide in search of food. So these species like redpolls, pine siskins, red-breasted nuthatches are often absent from places like Kentucky, and then some years they become super abundant. In fact, another example of such a species is this one right here. This is a red-breasted nuthatch. We expect the red-breasted nuthatch to be quite abundant in Kentucky this year. Last year, it was less abundant. They were still here, but much less so. The year before that was another eruption year where we had tons of them. So some years there's a ton, some years there are very few. Okay, some species to watch out for on migration. There's a whole bunch of them, hundreds, but we're only going to talk about a few of sort of my favorite. I'm the one running the podcast here, so I get to pick the favorites, but I'm sure you all have some favorites that I'm leaving out, and I'm sorry about that. I'm always taking suggestions. Okay, so one group that we see a lot in migration that are really kind of tricky for people are these forest-dwelling thrushes that are brown in color and have some amount of spotting on them. And the three I'm going to talk about today are the Swainson's thrush, which we've already talked about, the hermit thrush, and the wood thrush. and they look very similar to the untrained eye, but I promise you they're actually not that difficult to tell apart. So the Swainson's thrush, this one here, what you want to look for on that bird is it's got relatively light spotting on the breast in contrast to, say, a wood thrush, and the coloration of its back and wings and tail are like kind of this like light, cool, clay-colored brown. It also has these buff-colored spectacles over the eyes that the others don't have. The wood thrush has white eye ring, and this bird kind of has a white-ish eye ring that doesn't really form like a strong buffy spectacle. All right, so we've got cool gray-brownish color back. Well, the hermit thrush really is easy squeezy because it has rufous primary flight feathers and this rufusy red tail. None of the other thrushes have this like cool gray back with the bright reddish rufusy tail. And then, of course, the wood thrush has these much more prominent spotting than the other species, a bright white eye ring, and then the whole bird is like this chocolatey brown. None of the others are like that. So if you break things down into that way, they're actually not that difficult to identify. Another one we see a lot this time of year, and they occasionally will even overwinter here, although not often, is the gray catbird. This is a species that breeds all throughout Kentucky. It's a fun mimid, so they repeat the phrases of other birds. So easy to identify. It's overall very gray. We've got a black cap. Males and females look like exactly the same. And then if this one, I think he turns around, yeah, you can see this reddish brown undertail coverts, very helpful for identification. Another one that is just thick throughout Kentucky, and they winter here, but man, they're abundant this time of year, are American robins. And the reason I'm bringing them up is because there are some different plumages that I think are worth discussing. This is an adult sort of male style plumage. You can get some females that look like this too, where you've got a gray back, really bright reddish rufous breast, belly, and flanks, and then this dark head with white markings around the eye. Other birds, like this one is probably a young female, may look pretty different, where the head and back are a lighter color, and that allows some of these like darker lores and these throat stripes to kind of pop out a little bit more. And you also see a much lighter colored breast. And then finally, be on the lookout. There are still birds wearing their juvenile plumage. This one's actually kind of intermediate, where it's got this spotting all over that the young birds have, and it's getting some of those rufusy feathers, just a few here into the flanks. So you can get any of these variants or anywhere in between. So be on the lookout for that. It's a thrush, just like those other thrushes we talked about. Same family, but obviously has pretty different plumage. Blackbirds. There's a whole bunch of different species of blackbirds. We're only going to talk about 3 of them. They're really not that bad. And these are the 3 that you see the most. The common grackle with this kind of purple head and this bronze colored body. Males and females look really similar. Males' tails a bit longer, a bit more deeply sort of forked, if you will. The red-winged blackbird, these guys get into huge flocks. This is the female morph here. You may see some young males that sort of look like this as well. And then the breeding male plumage phenotype, very nicely named bird. It is a blackbird with a red wing. They have this little yellow or white border on there. Very straightforward to ID. The one that's tricky is the female, because it looks so different than the male. If you don't see her with a male, you may be rather confused, and people may mistake it for a sparrow. Some of the key things that help me tell it's not a sparrow is it's actually more streaked than a sparrow typically is, and they have this very long, very sort of intimidating looking beak that sparrows don't have. And often, this one actually doesn't show it. Often they'll have like a pinkish blush to the face and a lot of rufous in the mantle. Overall, not too bad, much bigger than a sparrow, kind of scarier than a sparrow. The other one that people see quite a bit and can be occasionally tricky are brown-headed cowbirds. The male here is, again, very aptly named. It has a brown head, and it's this sort of glossy, shiny plumage that we see in a lot of blackbirds. The female trips a lot of people up. The biggest piece of advice I can give you to identifying the female cowbird is that she is super plain, and like the fact that she has no wing bars, no stripes on the face, no spots, no streaks, nothing. The plainness itself is the trait that I use. Like this bird has nothing interesting going on plumage-wise, and I'm sure there's someone who would disagree with me on that, but that's how I remember it. This bird is incredibly plain. That alone is kind of the helpful identification characteristic. Now, of course, we've got the American goldfinch coming in many different flavors right now. The breeding male style here with the bright yellow plumage, black wings with white wing bars, and a black forehead. The adult female style, where you've got kind of more of this green muted color, but otherwise kind of similar to the male, lacking that black forehead. And then, of course, the juvenile phenotype, which has very little yellow at all and has these brownish wing bars. And of course, anything in between. Adults will transition from this plumage into something resembling this for the winter. But all birds, including young ones, into their first winter will look something like this and have a yellow face. They can have variable amounts of yellow in the breast and belly and flank, but they always have a yellow face. That's really helpful for identification. And then, of course, my favorite, warblers. There are a ton of different warbler species. Some of the common ones that we're going to see, this one is the common yellowthroat, really well-named bird. It's got this kind of like brownish olive back and tail, a black mask, yellow throat, which is where the species gets its name, and a little white border on that mask. The female lacks this black mask and white border, so she's just going to be this drabish olivey brown with a yellow throat. The yellow warbler, this is actually one of our earlier migrating warblers, and most of them are already gone for the year, but again, very well-named bird because it tends to be just overall quite a yellow bird. And then this guy, this is one of the few warblers that's reliably going to winter in most of Kentucky. We can find them in large numbers here in Lexington. The yellow-rumped warbler is well named in the fall time. In winter, it's very drab and not super exciting to look at. Some birds have a little yellow on the forehead. Some birds have a little yellow in the flank, but they always, always, always have a yellow rump, which makes them pretty straightforward to identify. These are just a few of the warblers. There's a ton of other warblers that we see, like the black and white warbler. This happens to be a female. The male has a black throat as well. They kind of crawl up and down the tree like a nuthatch. The American redstart, which has all different kinds of phenotypes because you've got female types, male types, and then young males that sort of look in between. Almost when I first started birding, reminded me of a little like mini oriole because it's that black and orange color pattern, but they're tiny, like a fraction the size of an oriole. Black-throated green warblers, these guys are all over right now. A reasonably well-named bird. It's kind of this green and yellow head with a blackish throat. A breeding male will have a truly black throat. Young birds and females will have kind of a dirty throat and then more black in the flanks and breast. We also have a variety of different vireo species. Three common ones that we're going to see are the red-eyed vireo, which that red eye is not always easy to see in the field. In fact, it usually is not visible in the field. It may just look like it has a black eye, but has this kind of greenish back, this gray cap and eye line with a pale supercilium. And notice on that eye line, it's gray and it almost has like a black border on it. That's a helpful characteristic. The white-eyed vireo, very easy to identify. It's got this gray hood and these these yellow spectacles with a white eye. And the blue-headed vireo, which basically has this blue-gray head and white spectacles, wing bars, the whole 9 yards. One other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these birds are migrating at nighttime. So if you go out, I have a dog, so I'm taking her out early in the morning when it's still very dark outside. And as I'm letting my dog out, I'm listening up to the sky because you can hear a lot of birds doing their nocturnal flight calls in the dark. You'll hear little chips and little peeps and little like squawks. It's a pretty cool thing. And I encourage you to all just after dark, just listen up to the sky. Right now, we are at a good period of migration, and there's a lot of birds still moving through. My last little nugget that I'm going to mention is now is the time that we start seeing our winter arrivals as well. So keep an eye out for those. For instance, we're going to get a lot of golden crowned kinglets. They're going to winter here in Kentucky. Dark-eyed juncos are starting to show up. White-throated sparrows, that's a favorite of mine that we have all winter long. And possibly my single favorite winter bird that we have here, and being here at the University of Kentucky, our Arboretum is loaded with these usually, the beautiful yellow-bellied sapsucker. And with that, I will see you next time on our next installment of Wings of Kentucky. Thank you so much for your time. I will be looking forward to it.
Those are always great to watch. All the different birds that, I can't remember all that. I don't see how he does that. But I know if you're a birder, a lot of people can, but I can't keep them all straight. But it's just really neat to see all the different varieties.
Oh yeah, we certainly appreciate Dr. McNeil. He does such a good job with those segments, and yeah, it's an insight into a world that we don't know a lot about, or most of us don't know a lot about, right? Obviously he does, but yeah, I really enjoy them as well.
Exactly.
Cool. Very cool.
Very cool. All right. Speaking of cool,
Yes.
we have Dr. Amanda Gumbert
Like a cool drink of water, right? Yes.
Exactly.
Hey, Dr. Gumbert.
How
Good
are you?
morning. I am great. Thank you so much. I was just going to comment on the same, Renee. I feel the same about the birds. He describes those as if it's clear to everyone how
Sure.
very different they are. And the thrushes, like he was describing the different browns the way a soil scientist describes shades of brown. Also, like clearly it's a
Surely you
10YR
You
would
would do the
know.
same
3/4.
thing.
Why would you think it's a 7.5 YR? For one, and so it's like it's just like it's fascinating to hear people who are so immersed in their specialties
Mhm.
to describe it in ways that some of us are like, it's going to take a lifetime of me looking at thrushes to see the difference in those
Right.
in those
Which is
specs.
why we
And I
had to
see
call.
Laurie jumping in. Laurie knows these things. She's really
Oh
good.
yeah, he's an avid birder.
She's my bird guru. So,
Your
Which is
bird
why we
nerd,
have
if you will.
experts like you come on and talk
Yeah,
about this stuff
yeah.
because we can't do that.
yeah. Let's geek out on water and soil. Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna geek out on it. So yeah,
So
Brian, go ahead and turn your
turn your
camera on
camera.
so folks can see you.
All right. Looks like we got a
Yeah.
first time guest.
First
Welcome,
timer,
Hello,
Billy.
everybody.
Yes. Well, we'll jump in. So my guest today is Dr. Brian Storrs, and Brian is the basin coordinator for the Licking River Basin here in Kentucky. And so we're excited to have Brian on the show today, and we do always get excited to learn about new watersheds. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Brian, I have sat down previously with Michaela Lambert,
Yep.
and Michaela described for us some of the ways that the Kentucky Division of Water, I guess, organizes and but also works to manage watersheds in the state and non-point source pollution. And so she was describing those for us and describing how the Division of Water has manages on a basin scale. And, we most of us, I think, know what a watershed is, but a basin is really just those bigger watersheds. And so she described that kind of that framework for basin coordination, and you are one of those designees as one of our basin coordinators.
Mhm.
So why don't you take a second, tell us what basin you work in, and a little bit about the geography.
Okay, I'm in the Licking River Basin. So as a basin coordinator, we are basically the liaison between the communities and the state and federal government. And the communities will call us up if they're having any kind of water quality or quantity issues. And then we help them bring in experts and funding to help them figure out that issue they're having. And I work in the Licking River Basin. And the Licking River Basin from west to east is Mount Sterling to Maysville. And then from Magoffin County, which is in the far south end, all the way up to northern Kentucky. And so I work with all of those communities across that whole basin, anything to do with non-point source pollution runoff.
Yeah, and that's a really big geographic area. I said
Yes,
this
it
to
is.
Michaela. Yeah, I'm sure you know that from experience of driving from one community to the other. And I mentioned that to Michaela, and I just want to acknowledge to you too that I always have thought that basin coordinators have an almost insurmountable task to kind of organize communities around water or their particular water source. But for you, you're kind of organizing lots of those at the same time, kind of the orchestra director, I guess. But you just have a large geographic area, and I want to
Mhm.
plug in here too that this is my home river basin. This is where I grew up, and just have a real fondness for the Licking River, and in particular the area at Blue Licks. So I'm, I guess, in the northern part of the Licking River basins where I have a lot of experience. So anyway, it is like we said, it's a big area. So tell us a little bit about the projects that are going on or how you go about your work in the Licking River Basin.
Well, I have two positions for the state, the Licking River Basin Coordinator, but I'm also the non-point source stormwater coordinator that across the state of Kentucky.
Okay, so now
And
you have an even more complicated job.
yes, yeah. So when I started with the non-point source stormwater, it quickly became apparent that a lot of communities are flooding themselves with their own stormwater. So non-point source stormwater quickly became flood mitigation, dealing with not only quality of water, but also quantity of water. And given that we have so many communities that are flooding across the Licking Basin regularly and across the state, that has kept me very, very busy. But then also the way that we're kind of approaching flooding, we can work with communities with flooding, and then as we get those projects moving, we can kind of turn the attention to the water quality while we're at it, when we're kind of working on those stormwater practices. So I've got a lot of inroads with my communities across the basin. As a matter of fact, there are essentially 20 counties in the Licking Basin, and we have projects in 17 of the 20 counties now. And they all have to do with either flood mitigation work or outdoor recreation. That's the other kind of big area that I work in, is really kind of incentivizing communities to pay attention to their local waterways. And that works through flood mitigation or outdoor recreation. So we've been
Yes.
very successful across the Licking Basin with that.
I mean, I feel like it's pretty easy to get the attention of elected officials, especially, but also
Mhm.
community managers, those who work for municipalities when you're dealing with flooding. So are you saying you kind of approach this from a water quantity perspective to get their attention and buy-in, and then you can kind of shift that attention a little bit toward water quality as well?
Yeah, yeah. So the way it works, when I first got out and started meeting with communities, I would bring up water quality for the local waterway, per the model that we're used to. And it's not necessarily the communities didn't care about the water quality of their local waterway. It's just they've got a million other things they're doing. We're working with
Sure.
judge executives that are work pro bono because they don't have any money in the general fund to pay our mayor. We're working with public works that is one guy with a riding lawnmower. They just got wearing, as you know, Amanda, you got public work people out there. They're wearing five hats.
Yeah,
They've
yeah,
got so
absolutely.
many different duties. And it became pretty apparent that just going in and talking about water quality right off the bat was not going to make any headway. So what we did is came back, kind of had a lot of discussions in-house about how to kind of meet communities with things that they need, like what incentives are they working for? So the model became to go back to the community and talk to them like, okay, how can we help you with anything around your waterway? And then if that turned into a flood mitigation, we have a lot of flooding going on. Can you help us with that? Or, hey, we have a really struggling economy and we're thinking about developing outdoor recreation. What can we do with our local waterway? And so we call this kind of the slow burn phenomenon, where we go in with a project that's not necessarily directly linked with water quality right off the bat, whether it's, flood mitigation work or developing outdoor recreation projects. But then during that pathway, it quickly becomes something to do with water quality. And you could imagine, once you start working on outdoor recreation, you have more people that are looking to hike along a waterway or more people to kayak. All of a sudden, water quality becomes a super, super important asset to these communities. And that's what we're seeing over and over. I have, regularly having 3, 4, and 5 watershed plan applications that are coming in every single year. And it's communities that are actually focusing on outdoor recreation, flood mitigation, where we're taking the flood mitigation, then turning it into public green space. And so we've had a lot of success with the kind of slow burn model. We're coming in, bringing something that they're actually really needing in their community or wanting, and then parlaying that into water quality as the process goes.
Sure. In parallel to that, so you're really kind of sounds like you focused, at least initially, with some of your work with kind of the urban, so to speak, communities or the areas of higher population. But also
Mhm.
just to say, the Licking River Basin is still a very rural basin. There's still a lot of agriculture that goes
Mhm.
on there, a lot of mixed use watersheds. I would say most of our Kentucky watersheds would fall under that mixed use description, but still a lot of agricultural land use going on. Um,
Mhm.
and that's some of the experience that I've had in the Licking River too. But let's go back a little bit. There's, I know you haven't mentioned it yet, but there's something that you're pretty known for in the water world in Kentucky of Dr. Brian Storrs, the Green Sinks guy. It's almost every time I've been with you at a meeting or in a program or something, you've had the opportunity to share a practice called Green Sinks. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how you've used it to address some of the problems that you just talked about that the communities are facing?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I started my position in 2022, right after the major flood in Eastern Kentucky. And one of my first visits was at Moorhead, Kentucky. And I met with the floodplain coordinator there and also the stormwater coordinator. We met for lunch and I said, how can we help with whatever you're doing here in your local water? And they said, honestly, we're scared after this flood. We know we had a near miss and we know our time's coming. So we will take anything and everything that you have to do for flood mitigation, right? So that kind of set us on the pathway of doing about a year and a half of research, trying to figure out what other states were doing for flood mitigation. That wasn't affordable for these communities, and that is one of the things that's really driven the Green Sinks program is economic need and in economically disadvantaged communities. And so we started working with Moorhead to build this Green Sinks program. And then the Gateway Area Development District found out what we were doing, and they called us in for a meeting and said, hey, we have a lot of economically disadvantaged communities that are flooding pretty regularly, and they're able to scrape up some money to hire an engineer and then what happens is that engineer will give them recommendations for $50 million projects or $100 million projects, and they just can't afford these projects. And so they just go say, okay, well, I guess we just live with flooding because there's no way out of this. And they really asked us, hey, since you're doing this project, can you really start to roll in and work with some of these economically disadvantaged communities? And that's really how the Green Sinks program was born, because what we realized pretty quickly is even though these communities are not rich in a lot of, resources as far as money monetarily, they are very wealthy in a lot of flood-prone properties that nobody wants, whether they're FEMA buyouts, whether fallow parts of agricultural fields, where they're old abandoned warehouse districts, a lot of properties along that are in the floodplain that nobody really wants. And what we realize is we have a lot of flood storage capacity in this floodplain because, if you think about a flood event, you have a layer of maybe 6 to 7 inches of sediment that goes across the floodplain every time you have a flood event. Now you multiply that times hundreds of years, it means you have 4, 6, 8, 10 feet of sediment built up in that floodplain. And so what we're doing is using these properties that are, nobody really wants to excavate all of that sediment out and actually create these massive 3, 4, 5, 7 acre basins that only fill up during a flood event. And so these basins are basically kind of a first level of protection for neighborhoods and intersections and parks. And you can imagine the more of the basins you build, the more you can catch that flood water before it enters in your community. And we've had a lot of success with this program, and it's really kind of expanded across the Licking Basin and across the state of Kentucky now.
So I guess I've always thought of Green Sinks as kind of like a giant rain garden, so to speak.
Yeah, we call them French drains on steroids.
Yeah. And so we know, from like rain gardens typically will have those, adjacent to a home or a building, or, some kind of paved area that will, kind of direct runoff into that, and it slowly percolates into the soil. So we're reducing the amount of stormwater that's runoff. But like you said, you have just taken this to like a whole different level in terms of the volume of storage. And I think that's really a fascinating way to do this, and what a service that you offer to these communities, that it's not just floodwater storage, but also an alternative green space when it's not, holding water.
And
So
that's where we've been into water quality right there. You
yeah,
just nailed it. So go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt.
No. Continue on. So make that connection for us. Like we
Okay,
have water
so
storage, we have
yeah.
stormwater, we have runoff, we have the storage, and then how do we get from that water storage and flood mitigation back over to
You got
improve
it.
water quality?
So, there's a lot of communities that we're working with because there's a lot of, the 86% of our communities in the Kentucky are in the floodplain. That means 86% of our communities are experiencing flooding at some level right now, right? And I try to explain to communities kind of like a Falmouth, where they've got like 60% of the communities in the floodplain. Your future is going to look, your community is going to look like the surface of a golf ball, right? Where you are um, increasing the elevation of properties or areas where the community is going to live, and then you're also excavating nearby it. So you can imagine you're doing as much excavating as elevating in order for your community to be able to survive in that floodplain. And so if we're creating all of these essentially, these green sinks or these giant French drains on steroids all along your floodplain, and we have all that fill, we might as well actually connect them all together into a trail system, right? And then a lot of communities are looking at all these giant bowls, basins that they're creating and saying, well, this one's only going to fill up at the 100-year flood event. Could we actually do something like put in a permeable soccer field in the bottom of it? Or could we actually turn it in, since we're going to have riprap bottom, for it drains, could we put permeable pavers on top of that and turn it into an amphitheater, right? So now all of a sudden we've got a situation where we have the floodplain, and then and I got this term from University of Kentucky Landscape Architecture program, but now we have the floodplain where we want people to flood the plain, right?
Nice,
We're,
nice.
we're
I like that.
creating,
Yep.
yeah, we're creating, they I have to give them credit because they came up with that
That's
term.
good.
But anyway, so now you got a situation where now people are now flooding the plain, and they're going to these parks and these trail systems and these amphitheaters in the floodplain that are all flood mitigation basins that are there as a super tool for flood mitigation for a community. But they've got all of this public green space that's now created, which means they're right next to the waterway, which means the next step is, okay, well, paddle boarding and kayaking and actually being in the waterway, not necessarily just around it. And that's where water quality now becomes a super important um, amenity for these communities. So water quality becomes super important for them for their outdoor recreation and tourism portfolio. And that's what we're seeing over and over again. You'll see in Maysville, Kentucky, we went in and started working with Maysville. Right off the bat, it was flood mitigation because their library, the property of their library floods twice a year. Right. So they need a lot of help in Limestone Creek.
That's not a good building to flood.
It's not, especially when they're
most
trying to
books are
build.
not waterproof.
Yeah, they're trying to build pickleball courts and they're trying to build other amenities on the property, but it floods twice a year and leaves a bunch of debris. And also during really major events, Limestone Creek floods downtown Maysville. And so they're trying to get a handle of their flooding issues there. And so, but then we go and we're working on building these green sinks, and then it becomes pretty apparent these green sinks are close enough to connect them together into a trail system and create a public green space. And then, all of a sudden they're like, okay, now we're actually reimagining our local waterway. We've got this public green space that we're talking about in trail system. It's like maybe we need to work on making a Limestone Creek into a part of our community and really be promoting paddle boarding and kayaking and this kind of outdoor recreation. And now they're looking at a whole restoration of Limestone Creek, rebuilding the whole creek so it free flows back into the Ohio and turn it into really a central component of the whole community, kind of like a Central Park that they have in New York. And
I
so
think,
that's what they're working on
yeah,
Maysville. And it all started from just going in and working with the library on flood mitigation. And that's where we're at now, is a full restoration, watershed management plan, addressing water quality, everything, and really making a local waterway the focal point of a community, which that is a huge win. And that's kind of what we're seeing all over Kentucky working on these projects, is their local waterway that's been ignored and looked at a way to get rid of stormwater and trash essentially for so long, is now becoming a focal part of the community
yeah.
as they're kind of rebuilding themselves.
Yeah, I have learned about the Maysville project from you, as well as we invited Deborah Cotterill, the mayor of Maysville, to meet with some visiting scholars that we had here on campus, and also the engagement with our landscape architecture students and
Yep.
um, the economic development folks and some of their student interns. And, it's so fascinating to me the things that, our students can come up with when we give them the freedom and creativity to just imagine what this could be
Yeah.
like. And, you provide that insight about water quality as well as, flooding and water quantity. And the mayor, she came to us and said exactly what you just were telling us about those communities. They didn't have the resources. They had a few people on staff. County engineers often have to cover the whole gamut of engineering challenges. They're not just
Yeah.
civil engineers or environmental engineers. They're doing all kinds of mechanical, structural kind of things. And, she was just thrilled with the opportunity of what could be coming along for the community. And so it's exciting to see places
Absolutely.
like Maysville, historic towns. They've got
Mhm.
flooding from both sides, right?
They do.
They have the Ohio River and they have flood walls, but then they have Limestone Creek, and it's such a historic part of Kentucky.
Yeah.
So hopefully they can blend that cultural and historic parts of the community
Yeah.
along with outdoor spaces. It's
And,
exciting.
and Maysville's been such an important project to us, because a lot of people like, they have a flood wall. They're like, okay, well, they close their flood wall and they're protected from flooding. But they don't understand when these local waterways come rage down like they are now, that their flood pumps can't keep up a lot of times to get the water over into the Ohio.
Right.
And so they flood out just like other communities.
Yeah.
And Mayor Cotterill has been super, super important in this project. She said early on when we started working on this project, and she's the quote that I always remember is she said, "We've had our backs to the creek for too long, and now it's time to turn around and face it." And once she said
Yeah.
that, it was kind of galvanized Buffalo Trace Area Development District and the city that she's working with. Okay, this is what we're doing, is we're going to really focus on this creek and make it part of our community. And now, since that's been happening in Maysville, now we have a Vanceburg that's wanting to do that. Now we're having a Garrison that's wanting to do that. And all these other communities are seeing what's happening in Maysville. And they're like, we need to start addressing this too. We need to focus on outdoor recreation, clean up our waterways. So that slow burn has now become almost kind of dynamite and stuff for a lot of other communities that are seeing what Maysville wants to do the same thing. So
Yeah. That's really exciting. And I think in a
yeah.
way we kind of create positive peer pressure in a way, a little bit of
Yes.
friendly competition among the
Yeah.
communities of, it's sometimes you look at Kentucky and the way our communities are structured. We have so many counties, and unfortunately, it makes those county governments, city governments, which often are separated, it makes them so sparse on resources.
Mhm.
But it does kind of create a little bit of friendly banter and competition sometimes.
Yeah.
But and it seems like though this is a really great opportunity for the communities to address flooding issues, which I think
Mhm.
we'll just continue to see more and more, because as populations continue to become more urbanized and we start to have more impervious surfaces and heavier rain events that we have to deal with, like these types of structural fixes or additions to dealing with stormwater, and then kind of that quiet benefit of getting the water quality benefit,
You
I
got
think
it. You
I
got
think
it.
it's really encouraging. So happy,
Yes.
happy, happy to see all that
Yeah.
happening in the
Yeah. I
Licking
mean,
River.
it's going really well. Like I said, there's 20 counties and we have 17 projects and 17 counties out of 20 and stuff that have projects. And so that means they're all moving towards water quality. So it's great success so
That's
far.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, good. Well, I have one final question for you, Brian.
For sure.
And this one is a little tough for some folks, but I am curious if you'll share with us what your favorite Kentucky waterway is.
My favorite Kentucky waterway is actually not in the Licking Basin.
We won't tell.
I know. Blasphemy.
We won't tell your boss.
If you have not visited this waterway, you need to, because it's really a rite of passage for Kentuckians to go visit. And it is called Short Creek, and it is in the Upper Cumberland Basin. And literally, the Short Creek comes out of a cave and it goes for maybe 100 yards and it goes back into a cave. And that's it.
Oh, wow.
That is Short Cakes.
That
Short
is
Creek.
one short creek for
Yeah,
sure.
but it is beautiful. It's clear. It's full of fish. There's a lot of churches that do baptisms in Short Creek, but
Oh,
it is
nice.
really like you go there and you sit in there and you take it in and you just really enjoy it. And it's really just kind of a Zen moment to really enjoy it. But Short Creek is my favorite waterway in the state of Kentucky, hands down.
Oh, excellent. Well, we will all have to venture over and see if we can enjoy that stream and water itself. That sounds exciting. I look
Yeah,
forward to getting to do that because I haven't been there. So
yeah,
that
you
gives
should
me
check it out.
something to look forward to. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being our guest today. I appreciate it. We've enjoyed learning more about the Licking River Basin. So thanks a bunch.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you both. Amanda, if you want to look, there are some questions in the chat pod that we need
Okay.
to address. Brian, you can keep your camera on if you want. And to address with these. So if you want to take a look at some of those and answer
All
those.
right. Okay, so question, Brian, this one's probably for you. Can green sinks produce food, or what else can they produce for humans or other species? So could we use them for trees or
Yeah,
nut or fruit
yeah.
producing?
Yeah, for sure. So the basic model is, we excavate the basin down to 2 to 4 feet above the groundwater and then put in a permeable bottom and then a 4-to-1 slope on the sides and turf. That's the basic model. But we're seeing a lot of communities thinking about planting instead of the 4-to-1 turf on the sides, planting wildflower meadows, planting native hardwood trees. We even have a basin that we're partnering with some ag people in Round County, and they have 7 acres of property that's going to be really valuable. And so we're going to create that into a green sink, but it's currently a hay field. And they said, we're perfectly happy partnering with you as long as we can keep it a hay field. So we're still going to keep it a hay field and make sure the slope is manageable for them to move their tractor down. So we're going to create a giant green sink, which is still going to be a hay field that they can cut hay on. So absolutely. And it's really, we're leaving it up to Public Works what they want to do because they're the ones going to have to maintain it. So some are
Yeah,
just going to want to keep the permeable bottom and the 4-to-1 slope, but other ones they'll get a lot more creative. Like I said, they're turning them into soccer fields and amphitheaters and all kinds of stuff. So food is definitely significant, and probably not on the bottom per se, because you need the permeability on the bottom unless you're doing kind of the hay field. But the
right.
edges, these 4-to-1 slopes offer a lot of opportunities, like Ford Food Forest with
Yeah,
Naki Braga, you
right.
imagine
That's
something
what
like
I was just
that.
thinking is about
Yeah,
like
you're
a
building
food
food
forest.
forests in these
Hmm.
basins, so there's a lot of opportunities for them. They really can be customized for whatever community needs.
Yeah. I mean, would be curious about like kind of thinking about plants that are, or at least being sensitive to the possibility of contamination that might get in through
Mhm.
floodwaters, and so really kind of paying attention to plants and how,
For
what
sure.
plants translocate
Yeah.
contaminants and making sure that they're safe for consumption.
Yeah,
So
and that really depends on, you got to remember these green sink basins, some of them, like there's some places where they may fill up every other year because you have
right,
regular flooding of an intersection, but then some of them are not going to fill up until you have that big 100-year event. And so you really need to be strategic about which ones you're using for what types of activity is exactly what you're talking about. Some are just
right.
going to be a necessary flood mitigation basin that's going to fill up every other year, and that's affects maintenance and everything else you can do with them.
Yeah. And then the next question is explain how the green sinks can raise the water table, as well as silt buildup to help hold the hill. Um, I don't know if you understand quite what that means, but I'm not sure that it's really intended to raise the water table, but more or less just to be an
Uh,
infiltration area.
yeah, so the way we're basically digging out these giant bowls, these giant French drains, but where it becomes heavily engineered is in the channel where the water flows into them, right? So I can point at a sidewalk and I say, as soon as that water touches that sidewalk, I want it to start pouring into this basin instead. That's where that channel that connects the green sink is heavily engineered. And so it catches the water. And really what it does is it can recharge the water table, right? You can imagine if you're catching this flood water and then it's percolating through this permeable bottom, it can recharge the flood table, or the water table for, people that are drinking well water and that kind of thing. And then as far as the sediment buildup, that's something we get questioned all the time. And again, it goes back to, what's the basin for? Is it going to fill up every other year because you have an intersection or a road that floods regularly, or is it only going to fill up for that 100-year event? So the one that's filling up every other year is going to need more maintenance, to removing sediment and that kind of thing, versus the 100-year
Sure.
event. So
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks, Brian.
yeah, for sure.
Thank you both for being on. We really appreciate these segments and appreciate all the guests that you've brought us, Amanda. It's been really neat learning about all this stuff.
Well, there are more to come. We have one scheduled for the first week of December. We're going to talk with Andrea Dreyer with the Kentucky River Basin, and then sprinkled in through the spring, we're going to reach out to some of our watershed heroes, who some of the folks that folks like Brian are working with to make these successes a reality. So
that would be wonderful. We're looking forward to all of them. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being on. All right. So we had an awesome show today. Really appreciate you joining us. And like I say every week, if you have any suggestions that you want for shows, you can email me at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we will try to get those on. And a lot of our shows that you've seen in the past have been from viewers that said, hey, I'd like to know about this. And so let us know if you have any questions like that. We're happy to try to bring those up. If you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, you can see all of our past shows, because everything we do is recorded, and so that you can go ahead and watch over 250 shows we have on there right now. So we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Again, don't forget to visit fromthewoodstoday.com, and we will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.